Hello. Hello to everybody. I want to say thank you to Latin American is Moving Collective, and particularly to Jasmine Imonem for her perseverance and for inviting me to record this session. I hope it's a good recording. So my intervention will be about what I call the art of organizing hope, and it will be short. And I just want to make a couple of comments and assertions about what are we doing right now in Latin America? What is this moment in which we are inserted into, of course, in relation to COVID, vaguely, but mainly in general. So I want to start citing Ernst Bloch, who wrote the book, The Principle of Hope, among other things. And when he writes, reality, I quote, is not complete without real possibility. The concrete utopia is on the horizon of all reality. And this seems to be an obvious thing to say. Obviously, reality should be open. Otherwise, as I always joke, we will be living in caverns. So clearly there is always a possibility for change. However, we know that we have been convinced, or from power they're trying to convince us that there is no alternative. So what is important in this citation is that he uses the idea of reality and possibility, which is a very, very important concept in Bloch's theoretical and philosophical dispositif, and the possibility of alternatives are very important for us, but I want to make clear what I mean by this. So this is not naive or based in a religious belief. The art of organizing hope is an idea that came from the movements and from a synergy between sociology and philosophy. As a critical theorist, I follow Adorno, that these two cannot be separated. And clearly, particularly these days, we need to bring not only critical theory back, as our colleague Werner Bonnefeld argues, but also the philosophy of hope. One of the things that are most important for me when we talk about Bloch is the fact that he talks about the reality as utopian, not people. We can be utopian, yes, but reality itself contains within it the possibility of something that is not yet, el aún no. And this is key because, in fact, he's not an utopianist. And I read quite a lot of the work of Kat Moore. She's an expert in Bloch's philosophy, and she wrote a very interesting book on speculative materialism, something that Habermas in his critique of Bloch never read. And so the key is, this is not about a wish or a fantasy or being optimistic about life, which is good, but it is about the fact that in the materiality of the world, in the texture of the world, possibilities they are lurking. And so we can be materialists and we can understand that possibility is not an idea, it's just there. So I think this is very important when we are activists, particularly in Latin America. The second concept that I like a lot, and it is also belongs to the art of organizing hope, is on the ontology of becoming. I don't know whether you know about this, but Heidegger talks about the ontology of being. And in general, I see when students write their dissertations or their PhD thesis, we all talk about ontology. And it's ontology of being. But Bloch says we are, yes, the word is, but also is not yet. So of course, this means that we see ourselves and the world as permanently becoming, because when we say the ontology of being, it seems that we are already there. And this ontology of becoming is very important for activism and for social movements, because we are all the time constructing a new world, searching, seeking for something better, because we know that there is possibility as materialist and there is struggle, of course. So this is, in fact, what it has to do with activism. So the principle of hope then, it's presents hope as an emotion, of course, together with fear, but also is a very strong dynamic. It is a force of nature, something that pushes us to throw ourselves to where we belong, and we belong to a humanity that seeks to live better. And hope is not simply an emotion, but action. It's not a passive expectation. And that's why the Art of Organizing Hope, as I use it in that book that I wrote in 2015, it's about changing the world concretely through struggle. But also, I think that we have reached a point of mediocrity that is particularly at the top, the crisis, we call it the crisis of democracy, but I would call it the crisis of everything. It's a civilizatory crisis, it's a crisis of imagination, a crisis of policy, a crisis of everything. And with COVID, obviously, everything became obvious. And this is a great opportunity to start moving or continue moving onto something different, onto alternatives. Now, the important thing here is that we are talking about politics. We're not talking about some little community as well, but not just a local action irrelevant for the rest of the world. This is how the Zapatistas were pictured in 94, and they have created a theoretical, epistemological, and political revolution. So I think we are at a moment in which the local is local, and we can create alternatives at the grassroots. And a significant shift for this way in which we are trying to change the world, of course, was the Zapatistas when they said no in 94. And since then, we have been really, Latin America, at the forefront of the struggles. And today, we see a crisis of social reproduction, a crisis of the social reproduction of life, human and non-human life in the planet. Hansen and Sechner argue that this crisis of social reproduction has put life at the center of struggle, and I agree. I agree that our struggles now are around trying to find alternative forms of social reproduction. And what do I mean by this? Obviously, food, shelter, care, work, education, everything that is not working. So in many parts of the world, and in Latin America as well, there are hundreds of alternatives. Bikal Sangam is an organization in India that has recorded 800 alternatives related to all these issues that I talked about, and they are all anti-patriarchal and of course ecological. In Mexico, Crianza Mutua, Gustavo Esteva, and Arturo Escobar, Crianza Mutua in Mexico and Colombia. So we are all in this global tapestry of alternatives. And so we see that we are doing the same kind of thing, weaving an alternatives. Instead of networking, weaving, creating a tapestry. And these alternatives understand hope as a category of struggle. And I think this is very important because hope today, despite the fact that many people argue that is not a good idea, like for example, Zizek, he has written about the hopelessness of hope, the courage of hopelessness, sorry. I do think that hope is what really disarms this attempt to stabilize and naturalize, normalize the violence entailed in capitalist, patriarchal, and colonial system. So I want to say also that in the interpretation of the crisis, obviously, when we think about capitalism and what's happening today, I do not think that we need to believe that the problem is financial capital. We know in Latin America how hard this could be. Of course, when there is a financial crisis, this is a form of the crisis. But the idea of the 1%, the greedy capitalist, that we can actually domesticate to have a proper distribution is very limited. Of course, we will continue fighting for the state, as we have demonstrated with the campaign for the depenalization of abortion, the legalization of abortion in Argentina recently, that the law is very important, but it's all very contradictory. So it is not about that 1% of financiers. This is the form of capitalism that produce a structural form. We don't have time to discuss this now. So this is a mistake. I think the problem is capitalism, is not financial capital. And so we are in the presence of this crisis of social reproduction. And 25 years ago, the Zapatistas, 26 years ago, the Zapatistas argue for globalization as a war against humanity. And today they are traveling to Europe to discuss how to defend life. Now, when I discuss this idea of defend life, sometimes I'm being criticized for being positive. As a critical theorist, and particularly knowing what's happening in Latin America as my region, it is hard to describe the defense of life as not positive, because we have seen many times that social movements get phagocytated. Is that a word? Social movements get absorbed into the logic of the state. However, I think the defense of life is affirmative, and I call this critical affirmation, a critical affirmation that contains a no within it. We say no in order to create, as the Zapatistas said, many yeses. But we have to keep the no going, because then, yes, it will be just something that we are doing for the community, but it will not really affect anybody apart from those people. So I would say then that the creation of alternatives is not naive. And in my work, and I finish with this, in the Art of Organizing Hope, we have detected 4 dynamics. And the first dynamic is the no. Obviously, is not linear. So the first dynamic is the no, but then we cannot no be nothing. And so we start creating an alternative, then we enter in hundreds of contradictions. As it happens, any of you who have a case study will realize that we can say no. I can talk more about Argentina or even Zapatistas, and then the state is there, the law is there, police brutality, and their own contradictions, because we suffer contradictions as well. Activists, we need to eat, we need to work. We're not sure whether to go on strike or not. We are not sure whether we want to lose the little that we have, or there is something that we can do together. All these counts. And that's why Bloch says that hope should be disappointable. However, I don't want you to think that we are stuck in this defeat, success, or struggle, create something, gets repressed or forgotten or absorbed by the state via policy or the law. There is what I call an excess, un excedente, a surplus possibility, a surplus utopia that cannot be measured with the same tools than the tools of power. What we see in the surface is that, yes, in Argentina, 2001, after Dualde took power, the movements were defeated, although much of it went onto policy with Kirchner, for the piqueteros, for the factories. But the asambleas, they were more temporary. However, I think there is a non-empirical struggle, and all the learnings that we had of that moment somehow changed the ordering of the real, as Icaza and Vasquez argue. So my last thing is, with the art of organizing hope, we must consider that we cannot understand our own activism and our own struggle with the same concepts and ideas that we use in a normal situation when we're not looking for an alternative and seeking to engage with the not yet reality. So this is something very important, because the struggles of today, and again, I cite Rosalba y Casa, are epistemic struggles. They are struggles that not only are seeking for alternative forms of living or of doing, obviously fighting against capitalism, against coloniality, and against patriarchy, but also, and more importantly, to create a new world in our minds, a new language, etc. And that's why some people are using, for example, care or affection or corazonar, all the literature on being sentipensante, to disrupt this form of ordering the real and give us the tools to understand other type of changes that they are taking place when we seek to create a different world. Thank you so much.